guys, this is Kelsey from Sweet Briar Farm. This is part 2 in our mini series about things you need to consider when you're starting with goats. So in this video I'm going to talk about housing, fencing, and how to feed your goats. So the first thing we want to talk about is housing. Goats are desert animals for the most part. So when you're taking care of them on your farm, you need to keep that in mind. They're not as tolerant of cold and wet as other animals you might have more experience with are, like cattle or pigs. They need to be babied more than other livestock, depending on where you live. So our farm is in Michigan, in the United States. We get all 4 seasons here. So we have hot weather in the summer where flies are concerned. We have cool and wet falls and springs, and then winter time in Michigan we can get feet of snow and temperatures that stay below freezing for months at a time. So we have to do a little bit of extra planning and have better structures so that our goats are comfortable and happy all year long. So we've got a pole barn here that we're in. And this is where the goats live now. We also have a log cabin Mike built last year in the summer, and some of our goats spent the winter out there, and they were warm and cozy too. So they need to have really a forest-sided shelter where they can get out of the wind, out of the rain, where they can snuggle up in some deep straw bedding and stay comfortable through the winter time. So bedding is important too. And in the winter time here, I usually clean out the pens once a week, but I leave the spot where they sleep, I leave the old bedding and just sprinkle some fresh bedding on top. And the microbial action of that manure and the bedding breaking down actually produces heat, and that helps to keep them comfortable. So I clean 3/4 of the pen, scoop them out, and put down fresh pine shavings is what I like to use. But then I leave a corner where they like to sleep with the old bedding, and I sprinkle the new stuff to help them have a warm place to snuggle up at night. So they need a place to be protected and out of the elements, because they're not really evolved or adapted for being in temperate climates like this, where the temperatures vary so much and we have so much wet to contend with, and they really don't like wet. They're divas. Let's move on. Now I want to talk to you about feeding. So goats are browsers in nature, which means that they would selectively snip off like the tips of branches of different bushes and leafy plants that are growing out on the ground. They're not grazers like cattle and sheep that eat almost exclusively grass. So we have to feed them more carefully, and to find those kinds of feeds that are most appropriate for browsers like goats is a challenge. So I have found that my goats do really well on this awesome alfalfa mix of hay that I'm able to buy from a local hay farmer. It's mostly alfalfa with some other grasses mixed in, which they do eat. But just like any, you wouldn't eat only spinach, even though it's a super healthy food. You need variety in your diet to have all the micronutrients you need, and it's the same for goats. So try and find a source of hay that's heavy in legumes. So legumes are things like clover, alfalfa, trefoil, things like this that are not just grasses. You want things that have broad leaves in them, because those are what the goats would choose to eat if they were out in the pasture. So in addition to hay, you could also pasture your goats depending on where you live. We have pasture that we plant for the cattle, and we take the goats out there for walks and they mow down. And we planted the same pasture mix in the paddock, in their play yard out behind the barn where the goats play, and they hardly touch it. So our goats are mostly dry lotted. We bring in all their feed. We buy in all their hay because our farm is so small. So we buy in the hay. We also offer our kids and does a grain ration. And I like this Kalmbach milk and meat goat feed. Here's the bag. Here's a close-up of the label so you can search for it yourself if you're interested. They love it. They gobble it up. And I chose this feed specifically because it's high in copper and selenium. So copper and selenium are important metals that are normally found in the soil, which would work their way into the feed, right? But in Michigan, our soils are deficient in copper and selenium. So those are things I need to be deliberate about incorporating into my animals' diets. So this is a grain that helps growing goats, so kids need grain, and even wethers and bucklings should have some grain when they're small. When they get older, it's good to phase grain out of male goats' diets as much as you can. Too much grain can lead to the production of urinary calculi, stones that can block up the urethra, and they can be fatal. So you need to be really careful that you're not feeding male goats too much calcium. And they can get calcium from grain, and they can also get calcium from alfalfa. So you need to be really careful about what you're feeding male goats. But for our does, this stuff is awesome. So they really like that. One last thing I mix in with the goat's grain, black oil sunflower seeds. It helps to increase the butterfat content in the doe's milk. But I just stir a little bit in with their grain all year long because they like it so much. So just a treat for them too. To make up the difference in their diet, they also need access to a supplement. So this would be like a salt that's blended with different micronutrients that the goats will need. So there's more copper and selenium here in this we use Sweet Lips milk and meat maker livestock supplement, but we leave that out free choice so the goats can access that anytime. You can see I've got these little half feeders. Where's a good clean one? There's one over here by Lacey. These little black Fortiflex feeders. I got the red stuff in one side is that Sweet Lips livestock supplement, and then goats also need baking soda. Ooh, Ruby and Ellen are playing. They need baking soda, which can help them regulate the pH in their rumens. So basically it's like a Tums. If they have upset tummies, then they'll go looking for that baking soda, and it can help them to feel better and stave off bloat. So just regular baking soda is the other stuff I have out all the time. Alright, so the goats have free choice access to baking soda and minerals. They have hay all day, and then twice a day we offer a little bit of grain. For your hay feeders, it can be anything you want as long as it works. So for these two little girls, they have just like a file crate that I hung up on the side of their pen here so they can pull hay out the bottom. But if you make it harder for them to pull out big clumps of hay, they'll waste less. So this is just something small and makeshift, or while they're in here, they won't be in this pen long. They're just too small to be in with the big girls right now. But they're having lots of fun. Alright, and then for the bigger goats, we have a bigger hay feeder. It was made from the metal crib around like a IBC tote. And it's just bent in a corner, and then there's a really nice heavy duty like 2x4 frame around it. So we put the hay in there, and the goats can pull it out the sides, but they can't pull out these clumps and throw them on the ground. The goats are persnickety eaters. If food touches the ground, they won't eat it. And that's for a good reason, right? Remember, goats are browsers, so when they're looking for things to eat, they're looking up. So it's important their hay is located up. That helps things make it into the rumen and get digested the right way. It also helps prevent problems with worms. So goats, being browsers and living in the desert in their native habitat, parasites, internal parasites like barber pole worm aren't really a problem because they're living in the desert, in the sand, and they're browsing up off the ground. So picking up those parasite eggs off of the grass isn't a problem where they've. But if you put them in a pasture and you force them to eat grass where they're reaching down to feed, and they're feeding in the same places where they're pooping, that's where they're going to pick up the parasite eggs. So there's some different strategies you can use to manage that. Maybe I'll do another video on parasite management in goats. But it's important that their hay is up and clean and dry. Okay. Oh, there's one other thing I forgot to tell you about feeding. We also offer our goats this kelp. We're really fortunate our local farm co-op can special order it in for us. It's not cheap, but you can see it's got lots of good stuff in it, but it's a natural source of selenium. So it's another way for our goats to get these micronutrients that our soils in Michigan are deficient in. And so that's an important way that we help keep our goats healthy, and they love it. They scarf it down. All right, so we've talked about housing, we've talked about feeding, water. Your goats need access to fresh, clean water all the time. I've got heated water buckets here, so I can plug it in and it keeps the water from freezing, which is important here in Michigan. If you live somewhere where it's not freezing, that's not a concern for you. But they will poop in their water. So like Lacey's water, I've got outside her pen so she can reach through the fence to get to it. Casey over here is getting a drink from this bucket, which I've hung up from the gate so it's up high, higher than their butts, so they can't poop into the water. And once somebody poops in the water bucket, nobody will drink it. So it's important that they have access to water all the time. For fencing, you want to make sure that your goats are safe. And that's the biggest thing. So your fencing will depend on what kind of predators you have in your area. Oh, and it's sprinkling out here. So we've got a hodgepodge of different things we were able to get our hands on because of the pandemic. But we've got, it's all at least 4 feet high. And then we have redundant layers of fencing around our farm. So if a goat were to get out of this fence, they'd still be contained in another fence, which has hot wire around it. And we did that mostly for our cattle, but it is nice peace of mind knowing that it keeps the goats safe. We have coyotes around our area. We hear them at night. We've been fortunate. We've never seen any on our farm since we put the fencing up, but they're definitely here. So knowing that my goats are protected by at least 2 layers of fencing with electric hot wire is a nice peace of mind for me. If you have bucks and does that you need to keep separate, which is a special concern here because we have tiny Nigerian Dwarf does, and our feigning does down here, Ruby and Ellen, will also stay very small. I need to make sure that our Nubian buck, Jimmy, never gets unprotected access to them. Oh, we can't see Jimmy right now. He's back there in the corner. So right now Jimmy's so small he's not a threat, but that's something that we'll have to be very careful we manage for in the future. So when we're building the fencing for our buck pen soon, we're going to be using taller fences with smaller holes, making sure that there's no way Jimmy can jump the fence and come breed a little tiny doe, because that could be a big problem for these little girls. Okay, so for goats, they need to have access every day, all the time, to fresh hay, which is high in legumes. They need water all the time. They need minerals and baking soda all the time. We give grain to our girls and kids twice a day. And we also offer the kelp. I usually put it out like once or twice a month, and they'll gobble it up. All right, they need 4-sided shelters to be protected from the weather all year long. And is there anything else you guys need to add? I think that's it. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. If you haven't watched it yet, I've got another video on here about what kind of goats you should get, wethers, bucks, does. Your goat needs a goat. So you can watch, that's part 1 about what are your goals for keeping goats. And I've got one more if you're interested in breeding your goats. What are some special things you need to consider? So stay tuned for that one. Thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe.